sits at about 2100 degrees. In there, there's a large ceramic crucible or a bowl, and that holds about 500 to 700 pounds of glass. So we throw glass in cold, bring it all the way up, and then we can use it at a working temperature. This is our pipe warmer, and hot glass only sticks to hot things. So Colin's got a nice stainless steel blowpipe here. You can tell it's a blowpipe because it's hollow and it's got this nice little tip at the end. See that guy? And we want to get this to a nice glowing cherry red, because when Colin goes to gather, it's sort of like winding up honey onto a chopstick, right? It's not the solid glass that you're familiar with. We're getting a little bit of gooiness. If the pipe ever gets too hot, we have our pipe cooler over there. We got our nice Marver table right here. Colin's in our reheating chamber. So when we come out of the furnace, that glass is going to set up pretty quickly. So Colin can come out, use all the heat he's got, and go back into our reheating chamber and bring it back. Working with clay. Glass is a much lower temperature than ceramic material. So most of the equipment in our studio is all made out of just a high fire ceramic material. So Colin's going to be working with cane today. You see I got these 3 nice little canes. We got a little pink, a little yellow, a little blue. And Colin actually pulled these ahead of time. So the nice thing about our glass is that we can have it cool down all the way to room temperature, and as long as we bring it all the way back up, we can start working with it. And there's a couple different types of glasses. We're working with soft glass or soda lime glass. So any sort of glass that has the same coefficient of expansion, we can introduce it into our hot shop, and it'll totally be compatible, and we can just blow it however we want. So Colin, ahead of time, how we make these canes, Colin can just take a big glob of solid glass, and solid glass when it's hot is really elastic. So if we were to take a fresh gather out of the furnace, I could grab one end and Colin could grab the other, and we could pull and pull and pull. So Colin basically just makes a big log, and then we can quench it in some water, and just based on the heat within the glass, we can pull and stretch it into these thin canes. So Colin's preheated his plate a little bit. If we go and we have a cold plate and we stick it in there, that can cause some thermal shock with the canes. So we just preheat the plate a little bit, make everybody nice and happy. This is the tedious part, right? Because that shelf's really, really hot. So Colin can't like set his hands on it. So he's got to quickly navigate what order he wants the canes in. And we could even create complex canes. So Colin could roll all of this cane up onto a blob and then pull it again. So glass is infinitely stretchable, basically. And we could really, really introduce it over and over again into the heat, and it works totally fine. Soda lime glass does have 3 major components. So the main component is silica, right? And silica is the basis for all rocks and sort of rock-like material, which glass is sort of a branch of. But the thing that allows us to melt that silica at a much lower temperature is flux. And in this case, the soda ash of the soda lime glass is our flux. So if we were to just melt raw silica, we're gonna have to crank that furnace up to like 4,000 degrees. And it's already hot enough. Like, we wanna make things a little bit easier. So our glass also has limestone in it, and that's why Ohio is a really great resource for glass, because we have a lot of limestone-rich rock, just because we used to be under the ocean. So all of that stuff is fossilized, and now we can use it to make our glass nice and stable. If we take anything from the ancient collection, ooh, Colin's got a pie divider, we'll talk about that in a second. If we take anything from the ancient collection and we stick it in a bucket of water, eventually that stuff's gonna break down over time, just because it doesn't have that limestone in it. So Colin's got a nice pie divider. That basically takes the length of our canes, divides it by pi, and makes it so that Colin can figure out the setup he needs so that he can have a nice, are you putting this on a collar? Yeah. So Colin can have a nice collar that's the same diameter as all those canes. And we could roll up canes on a bubble. Colin's gonna do it on a collar, just because it's a little bit easier. I think he's gonna take one more heat and then flip, if I have to take a guess. Okay. That sounds good. So what Colin's looking for right now is for those canes to start softening up. Since that glass is thin enough, we don't have to do a lot of extra work to prepare it to go back in the reheating chamber. But when we do demonstrations and we pick up something thick like color bar, we have to reintroduce it into the kiln, bring it back up to a annealing temperature, and then start working with it. But these are thin enough that we can get away with this. It allows Colin to add a little bit more patterning. Glass color doesn't really work like paint color. We can't make our own colors in this facility. All of these are pre-bought color bars, so everything's made with different metal oxides. So we can't take red glass and purple and blue glass and make purple glass. Just because of all of those metal oxides in there, they can all react in different ways, and usually it makes stuff turn brown. So Colin wants to have a nice layer of clear between all of his colors. And Kane can add a little bit of patterning. Kane's very much a traditional Italian technique. So if you look at a lot of the old Italian stuff we have in the collection, a lot of the fancier stuff will have cane in it. Just a way to add a little bit of more ornamental. Colin's giving that plate a flip, make sure everything's nice and even. Colin's going to take another heat and make sure these canes are nice and fused together. If Colin were to roll up canes that aren't hot enough, they're going to totally segment out like pieces of spaghetti. And then it'll be a lot harder for him to stitch this into a bubble. Because normally when we do the demonstration, Colin gets a gather of glass, he introduces a bubble into it, then we can add color on. But in this case, we're pre-making our bubble with the canes. Makes things a little bit easier. So once Colin's got that nice and warm, I think we got a couple more seconds. These can be tough reheats just because Colin has that really heavy fork. And he puts those canes right up to the burner. Our reheating chamber is actually entirely made out of ceramic material inside of a metal frame. And we have one burner coming out, so it's basically one flame that heats the entire chamber. And that ceramic material is actually called refractory material. So the heat that comes out of the burner actually reflects and heats up the entire chamber. But Colin wants these hot fast, so he has to stick them right in the burner. Which can be a little toasty. Colin does this all the time though, so I can tell he does not need a glove. I, however, am a big baby and will be using a glove. Colin's giving him a good squeeze, making sure there's no air in between them. If we roll them up and there's even a little gap, Colin will start to blow, and you'll actually be able to hear the hole. So it's a lot easier for Colin to just get it right this time. You ready? Yes, please. It's a lot easier for Colin to sort of heat these all up at once and then not have to worry about bubbles later on. You want me to give him just one good one? Okay. So what I'm looking for is for them to start to get a little bit soft. So when we're in the reheating chamber, we can't actually see the heat of the cane because everything's sort of glowing bright orange. I'm looking for movement. Okay. I'm good for another minute. So Colin's making a collar right now. I'm gonna drop you in. Ooh.
Mind grabbing that pie divider for me?
Yeah. This is sort of just a little bit of skin on the pipe, because Colin could just take a hot pipe in theory and just wrap these up, but it's gonna be a lot harder to set his diameter. And also, since we're a shared facility, there's a lot of different artists working in here. And if Colin gets any color onto the pipe head, it's gonna start showing up in other people's work. What? Okay. You ready? I think I'm ready. Yeah. Colin's gonna heat its collar up a little bit. And remember, hot glass sticks to hot glass really well. So Colin's just gonna come to one end. Move, sorry, I could have done that. And you can stick it on and it'll roll right up. Oh yeah, you got a lot of extra pain. So I'm gonna get this out of the way. Then Colin's gonna basically zip this up. So he might take off a couple canes. But he's gonna basically stretch these canes around to seal back up into one bubble. When we use the ceramic plates, a lot of them we actually use kiln wash on. So it's basically another ceramic material that makes it so that when the glass gets really hot, it won't fuse to that plate. So Colin's just brushing some of that off, making sure he doesn't have any dust in there. Once that dust is in there and Colin takes another gather on top of this, we can't actually take it back out. Colin's gonna cut off a couple canes. Easy peasy. It never happened. Now we can start to stitch this up. So Colin's gonna take his tweezers and he's just gonna basically squeeze those two ends together. Sort of like a zipper, right? You wanna stick the end together and then slowly go up. And now we'll take a minute to sort of homogenize those so we can heat this all back up into one bubble. One more cleanup.
I'm going to try my best to keep them straight.
Good luck with that. So now Colin's got to take these canes all the way back up to that 2100 degree temperature. And we're going to start off a little bit gently just because these canes are so thin. Thin glass heats up really fast and cools down really fast just because of its insulating properties. So Colin had a big giant glob of glass. It's going to take a long time to cool down, but also a long time to heat up. Since these are already so thin, he sort of has a short amount of working time. So you'll notice he'll go in and out of the reheating chamber pretty quickly. So we'll probably do that a couple more times. You can sort of, I don't know if you guys can hear it, but it makes a sound where you can really hear the indents in between the glass as he's rolling. These are sort of only tack fused together. So you notice when Colin cut them apart, they can really easily break apart. Not so much anymore, but we're starting to get there. Colin's gonna try to keep his cane straight today. So we'll see how that goes. It's much easier. You notice as he's turning, if Colin just turns in one direction, it's just because of how the glass is moving, those canes will start to wind up into a little curl.
Do you mind keeping the flower that I cut off?
Yeah, I can do that. You want me to anneal it?
Yes, please.
Yeah, do we have a good paddle? I'll be right back. That is too small. I got this guy. Yeah, I'll do the thingy. Unless you want to just tap it off on the paddle. Okay. Yeah, then I can just pizza paddle it in.
Yeah, I'm going to do it after I stitch it down.
Yep. So we're going to save this little end for Colin. Usually people save these sort of as a color reference. So because of the metal oxides in the glass color, it never really looks like the color you think it's going to be. Oop, sorry I can take this on our little paddle. Treat it sort of like a pizza. And we'll put it away in our annealing oven. And we'll talk about annealing once we get done with the piece. It's not important right now. But Colin will save that just in case he wants to look at the color patterning. Gives him a little bit more information on the cane. So now we got that nice and sealed up. Colin's going to condense that bubble down a little bit. We're going to take another gather on top of this. But if Colin's bubble is really thin and we go to gather on top, it's going to be really hard to get a good mass because it'll start to sort of constrict down on itself really quickly. Okay. Colin's got his nice blow hose. You want me to turn that for a sec? These pipes are so shiny.
Thank you. Huh?
So fresh.
I know. So nice.
Colin's got his lovely blow hose. Good. So we're letting that set up. Then Colin's going to really heat it up. Doing a little prep so we can put our next layer on. And we're working in here, Colin can't really actually gather up enough glass for an entire object, right? Remember the chapstick and the honey. It's like humanly impossible to gather up enough glass to make a bottle or a bowl or whatever we're making. So Colin's got this nice starter layer. Usually your starter layer you can put color bar on and then put a bubble in it. But in our case we've got cane. Oh yeah, that's from George. I'll mention it to, who's this afternoon? Vaughn?
Chelsea?
Chelsea? No, it's Friday.
Oh, wow. Whomever's on here.
Yep. So once Colin gets that nice and roasted, he'll come over to our marver table, I'm guessing. Colin loves the marver. We like to say glass is a memory. So our marver is sort of a large stainless steel object. And stainless steel is really good at sucking the heat out of the glass. And when we're working in here, heat's really the name of the game. So when you first come out of the furnace, that's the most heat you'll ever have. And we can use our marver tool to sort of make the glass cool in very specific areas. So you'll notice Colin gives it that nice point. It's because we want the most thickness at the bottom of the object. Are we doing that again? One more time?
One more time.
Keep it really nice and safe. Okay. Colin's gonna come back to our bench. And at this point, Colin can really use a lot of different tools. Most of our tools are made out of stainless steel, but like I said, those tools take a lot of heat out of the glass. So Colin's got his nice jacks. These are sort of our iconic glass blower tool. So you'll notice Colin used these in a lot of different ways. They're modeled after a pair of shears. So you basically have the two blades on the bottom and the strap on the back. And really you can use the entire surface of the tool to shape your glass as you're working. Yeah, I can rake. I'm just going to give the furnace a quick rake. This is just sort of popping any surface bubbles. So Colin wants to minimize sort of the bubbles trapped in this object, so we got to make sure there's none in the furnace. Just going to let it set up a little bit.
It's tough to leave them straight. They're all kind of twisted.
The hardest part.
Yeah.
Colin's gonna come in, he's gonna angle down. He's gonna physically wind that glass up onto the outside of our cane. And there's our fresh glass. So you'll notice this has a lot more movement than any of the glass we've seen in the demonstration so far. That furnace heat is the hottest it'll ever be. So right now is when Colin really has to put the turning into overdrive. If at any point he even hesitates, it's going to come off center a little bit. And being on center is really important. You know, when you take a pottery class and you learn how to center the clay in the beginning, we sort of learn to do that throughout the entire time. So you think Colin's right hand is the one with the tools. It's probably doing most of the work. But in actuality, the left hand's really got all of the power, and it's really doing all of the turning. Colin's going on with our newspaper tool. The hardest part about working with this material is that we can never really feel it as we're working with it. I'm a very tactile person. I want sheets of newspaper folded up basically into a little booklet, and then Colin can sort of feel the sides of the glass through it. It's not too hot. All of our sort of wet tools and our wooden tools are all waterlogged. So the steam is actually what's shaping the glass. The newspaper never actually should come into contact with it. This uses that steam barrier, and it's the same effect that if you have a hot pan on the stove, you throw a little water in it, it does that little dancey thing. It's that same Leidenfrost effect that makes it so that we can shape this with the steam barrier. So Colin's gonna go in and he's starting to inflate a little bit now. And when Colin's blowing, he's not blowing crazy hard. You gotta think of it like a balloon. If we have a really, really fresh gather and you blow super, super hard, it can totally pop and the air will shoot right through. When we're blowing, the air naturally wants to go where the glass is the hottest. So Colin can counteract it with his newspaper, keep the bottom nice and cold, and he's inflating something called the shoulder. And as I sort of start to talk about the bubble, you'll hear me sort of talk about it like a body. So up by the top, we got the neck, then we got our shoulder, and then we got our foot at the bottom. I think Colin's making a bottle. So we gotta really overinflate our neck out because Colin's gonna physically pull that top of our bottle out. Oh yeah, are we ready? Colin's gonna come over to our marver. He's doing a little bit of bottom weighting. So this is important because glass is a very fragile material. So we like to add a lot of extra meat on the bottom. So that way, it's the heaviest on the bottom. So if something bumps into it, it's not going to wiggle all around. It's going to stay nice and sturdy. Now Colin's got his shoulder nice and inflated. The noodle is one of the hardest COVID-19 challenges. So normally we would all be very intimate, working a lot together. But that involves a lot of exchange of saliva, which is now gross that I think about it. Colin's got his nice little noodle. So what he's going to do is he's actually going to take his jacks and sort of set where he wants his neck to start, and then he can physically pull that out. Gonna give it a quick paper. I'm gonna protect your hand because I know you got that blister. He's setting his diameter that he wants his neck to be, and then he can physically start pulling out. This is just a wooden paddle. All of our wooden tools are made out of fruit wood, so they have a really tight grain pattern, so they don't burn quite as easily. If we were to use something like oak, it's just going to catch up in flames pretty quickly. Colin's putting in our constriction line. Do you want a map gas?
Yeah, I got one.
Okay. And this is sort of our most basic principle of glass blowing, right? You don't see anything in the museum with a pipe stuck to the end of it. So, Colin's going to constrict down at the top, and this is basically just going to tell the glass where we want it to break off. Colin's got a nice little map gas. When we're going into the reheating chamber, it's a really aggressive heat from all directions. So, in order to just spot heat that neck, Colin's got his nice little torch. You see us using the torches once we really have to get specific with heating. Now we got our nice neckline in. Colin might crisp that up a little bit, depends on his preference. The neckline just has to be tight enough that we know where the glass is going to break. And especially with bottles, if the end of his neck is too tight, the glass will want to break off there when we go to flip it around. Colin's going to crank that in one more time. And when we're working with our tools, we want to be really gentle with the material. You think of glass as this really hard surface that you can really go to town on. But once it's this molten, Colin has to be really, really gentle. Any sort of one touch can cause it to come off center, and then we have to correct it. And in here we like to say it's much harder to fix things than to just throw them away and start over again. So Colin now is just going to start heating the bottom of our neck, or our bottle. If Colin gets that neck too hot, it's going to take a lot more work to turn and keep it on center. So he'll take occasional heats. These are called flashes. So now Colin's probably going to inflate his new shoulder a little bit, do a little bit of stretching. And we can start to really finalize the shape of our bottle. When we work in here, it's a little bit different because we work from the top down. So the part that's closest to our blowpipe is actually the top of our object that will later on flip around. So Colin's blowing, inflating his new shoulder a little bit, while still keeping that paper on the end, just to really enforce that bottom weight. Little stretch. So Colin's going to heat this up and he's going to stretch this out. And you would think like the entire time we're turning and sort of fighting gravity, but we can really use gravity to our advantage. So when Colin comes out of our reheating chamber, he's going to come straight up and down, and that's going to allow that glass to physically sort of flow towards the ground. And since we have that nice bottom weight in there, it's going to actually pull at the side walls, just because they're going to be a little bit warmer and a little bit more malleable. Colin's going to give it one more flash. And that's just to keep the part on the pipe, which is our moil, nice and happy. If the moil ever starts cracking, that's when you know you have to start worrying about the piece. Colin's got a little bit of length. It depends on how long he wants to go. The blow hose is coming off. Oh, he's going to do a spin. So Colin's actually going to spin this all the way around, probably. Yeah. This is just using a little bit of centrifugal force. So if you've ever seen a centrifuge operate, it spins and separates different liquids. In this case, we can use it to really elongate quickly, just because of that spinning force really pulls at the end of the glass. So now Colin's got his bottle nice and long. Now we can start to really inflate. So Colin's going to come on with his jacks, sort of set the diameter of the bottle he wants. And then I can come on with our wooden paddle and shape up the bottom whenever he's ready.
Should be on the next one.
Okay. Colin's going for a nice tapered shape. And when Colin's blowing, you really can't sort of tell the difference, but he's really giving himself back pressure. So when he goes on with the jacks, it's sort of like a mold. But if he keeps pushing, eventually it's going to be enough to constrict that glass down. So he blows just a little bit, so that way it keeps it nice and puffed out. Sort of coming at it from both sides. And now he's just heating the very bottom of the bubble. That tells me he's ready to start shaping up the bottom. So I'll come on with my wooden paddle. And this allows us to get it nice and flat. When we're working in here, we really have to think about how our objects are making contact with the table. Okay, we're gonna do one more time just to clean it up. So when you pick up a wine bottle and you flip it upside down, it's got that really large indent. It's because really when you're making something out of glass, you want the outer ring to be the only thing connecting with the table. That's gonna provide a lot more stability than if you just have the entire thing touching. And that's just because if there's any irregularity, it sort of gives you a little bit of wiggle room before it starts to topple over a little bit. So we'll do that one more time. Really crispy it up. And I can push pretty hard. And we're gonna stick a little glob of glass onto the bottom. And we're not gonna totally fuse it on. We're just gonna put on enough contact so that we can break this off later on. It's sort of a connection point designed to fail. You ready? Yeah. Oop. Colin will give you a good view of the bottle. I'll make him a quick punny. Ooh, is this one of the new ones? Let's make it good. Oh, it's low. Here's where I get really quiet, just because I have to make Colin the correct shape of punty. If I make it too weird, it can really easily cause it to either fuse on or fall off entirely. I'll cool this down. When we grab these pipes, we want to have a really wide breadth. It's sort of like a hockey stick. I'm gonna come on over, Colin will stick me on. And he's just turning to make sure we stay nice and on center. Sorry, I'm a little warm. Stability. I'm good. I'm good. I can take that. Colin's gonna use a couple drops of water. Give it a tap, and I'll come over and give it a good splash. This is Colin's sort of last moment to really center it. So if his bottle is super off center, and he goes to open it up, it's going to totally open up crooked, and you can totally tell. And since we don't have a lot of thickness on the bottom, we can't go on and correct it later on. So Colin's going to make sure it's nice and straight. Then we're going to start heating up the front. So this glass is just cold enough for us to physically break it, sort of like your traditional glass, your sort of cold room temperature. So this is sort of our longest reheat. So normally you see Colin up and down, and this can be really demanding on your body. So to have to stand up there for anywhere from 30 seconds to a minute, depending on how thick our glass is, can feel like forever. But this allows us to sort of reshape the object. So if you take your cup that you buy from like IKEA or Target or whatever, you'll notice they don't have anything on the bottom. So how you can tell something is hand blown is because it'll have that punty mark on the bottom. And sometimes we'll take them off in the cold shop. We can physically grind them away with diamond wheels. But that's really a surefire way. So how they make those Kroger and IKEA cups is they actually take a mold and they just blow into the mold. And then they basically cut their bubble off before we would have puntied it, let it cool down, and then they can cut off the top and polish it. Saves them a lot of time. They got machines making their work. Makes everything a lot cheaper. But when we're working in here, Colin really wants to have control over the top. So we can make cups like that in here, then heat them back up and flame polish them. No biggie. But this allows us a little bit more control over the top part of the shape. So once Colin's got this nice and gooey, our neck is naturally going to be our thickest part, or any sort of top of our bubble, just because the glass is the coldest by the pipe. So Colin's going to take his tweezers and physically actually pull and stretch on this glass a little bit. So he's going to give it a quick round of pinches, just so he has something to hold on to, and then you can start to really see him pull. He's just going to lengthen this out and thin it out a little bit. Give it a good, oh, you're already going for the constriction line.
I'm not going to make the last read.
So in order for us to get all these pinches off, and some people call this a floret, some people like to leave it on their work. If I know Colin, it's got to go. So he's going to make a constriction line, and we're going to use the exact same principle that we did before to break this extra bit off. Colin's going to come out. He's going to go back on with his jacks. And right now he's sort of focusing on cooling, right? So he's cooling the inside. And then he's going to take his diamond shears, do a quick grab, and I'll give it a little tap, and it comes right off. The diamond shears are sort of our other cool glass blowing tool. So when we're working in here, we're working entirely in the round. So Colin's working from all directions on the pipe. He has a pair of straight shears, which are just like your regular old scissors, just big and stainless steel. But these offer sort of a lot less, they only offer to be able to cut from one side, so you'll get a straight line. And when we're blowing, we're working entirely in the round. So we want to have sort of a diamond shape, hence the diamond shear. So it comes from all sides. Let me grab it. So I'm going to use my nice little wooden paddle, just like we did before with the bottom. We're making sure the top is nice and flat.
How do you think we should finish this?
I kind of like it like that.
Kind of like it like that?
Yeah, I don't think you should flare it. I think it looks nice.
I want to touch it one more time.
One more time.
If you don't mind.
Clean it up a little bit. Oh, nice. So we'll clean this up one more time. I'm going to come back on with his jacks. We'll go on the inside. And really the angle that Colin's jacks are at is what's setting the width and sort of the angle of the neck. So if Colin really dropped his angle or really raised it, it would cause it to come up a little bit more flared. Cool. So Colin's going to start flashing down. That tip of that bottle was just hot enough for us to really move it around. So now we're going to sort of start to even out the heat a little bit. And we'll reintroduce some more heat into that punty. Remember that connection point's designed to fail. So Colin will give it some quick flashes. He'll go on with his map gas. And once we know it's ready is when that punty starts to move a little bit. So I'm going to put on my super cool outfit. This is going to allow me to go into our annealing oven, which is where we're actually going to cool the glass down. If we were to leave this bottle just out in room temperature air, it's actually going to start cracking within the first couple minutes. So we're gonna let it cool down a little bit, slowly over time. You almost there? Almost there? Okay. If Colin just goes when everything's cold and tries to knock this off, there's not enough of a temperature difference for us to introduce the water and really cause heat shock. It's just gonna totally chunk out the bottom. And then Colin has a lovely flower pot. Okay, that sounds fine. Ooh, scared. Colin's gonna take a little bit of water. He's got this nice little squirty bottle with a needle on the end of it. And take it up all the way to where the punty meets the bottom of the vase. Just gonna use our hot torch, give it a little smooth. Boop. Thank you. So we're gonna put that in there to cool down slowly. So the thickest part of that vase is really the bottom, which is only about that thick. So we're gonna let that cool down for about 24 hours. We could probably rush it a little bit if we wanted to. But as the glass starts to get thicker, you have to get slower and slower with your cooling time. So we have that large cast bench in the ancient gallery. That actually annealed for about 11 months. So as we've sort of gotten computerized annealing, we can get into thicker and thicker castings, and that allows us to work more with the glass. If you guys have any questions, you can go ahead and comment them in the comments. Or if you're watching this in the future, you can comment then. We'll have somebody answer you. Otherwise, our galleries are open. We're Wednesday through Sunday. The hours vary by day, so you can look those up. What else? We got these going on. We're doing Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday, all at 2 o'clock. So if you guys are interested in watching us then, we'll be back on Sunday. And we'd also like to thank Owens, Illinois for sponsoring all of our demonstrations. Any questions? Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you on Sunday.